Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a chef who's challenging what most of us think we know about Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cooking, focusing on a cuisine few Americans are familiar with, Turkish food. Here's Ana Sortun. Chef, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, David. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. So reading about you, you're called one of the country's most creative fusion practitioners. The New York Times called you deeply inventive. What the hell are you doing?
I don't know. I'm trying to bring Middle Eastern food more in the mainstream and try to expand people's perception of what Mediterranean food is by pushing it a little east.
Pushing it a little east?
Yeah. So really trying to bring out the Eastern Mediterranean into the good representation.
Define Eastern Mediterranean.
So what sets Eastern Mediterranean apart from the rest of the Mediterranean is the use of spice. Spice is used in a Mediterranean way, so sort of medium, nothing really heavily spiced like when you get into Indian cooking a little further east. It's more of using certain spices to create depth, richness, and flavor, but without making something too heavy. It's almost how I describe it is where East meets West, really. It's a lot of Western technique with some Eastern flavors and ingredients.
Well, when you talk about Eastern Mediterranean, is that Turkey?
Yeah, so my personal experience is very much inspired by Turkey. I've been once or twice a year for the last 30 years, and it's become like a study for me, a real passion and, a real purpose in life to try to keep Turkish food in the light and teach people about it because it's still very unfamiliar to people.
So Turkish food and Greek food are not the same thing.
Well, there are some similarities, and, the Ottoman Empire is part of that, right? They really spread into the rest of the Mediterranean going further west. You do see traces of Turkish food in Greek food, although they would argue a lot about who the origin is. They do argue a lot about who actually is the creator of some of these well-known dishes because you see a crossover, especially on the Aegean side of Turkey. You see a lot of Greek influence and you see a lot of Turkish influence in the north of Greece and also in the Aegean. So it's similar, but you see less spices in Greece. You see more flavors like lemon, olive oil, oregano. That's what makes something taste Greek. And in Turkey, you get more into different spices like sumac and za'atar and different chilies like marash and urfa.
Za'atar, sort of the oregano of that region, right?
Yeah, za'atar has kind of a double meaning. It's the name of this wild herb that grows in the mountains all over the place, all over the Eastern Mediterranean, and it's related to thyme. It's in the hyssop family. It also looks like oregano, so it can be used interchangeably. Some people say it's thyme, some people say it's oregano, but there's a lot of different strains of za'atar. It means that wild herb, but it also means that wild herb blended with sumac and sesame seed, and you could eat it. You eat it by the spoonful, combined with olive oil. It's a super flavor, really delicious spice blend.
It's in my spice drawer. Is your background Turkish or Mediterranean or Middle Eastern in any way?
Not even a little bit. It's a very sort of strange, haphazard story. I was cooking at a restaurant in Harvard Square 30-some years ago. The owner of the restaurant was from Syria, and he was having dinner one night with a Turkish woman, and I was cooking Mediterranean food, but really focused on the central part of the Mediterranean, the south of France, Italy, Spain. And she was talking to him, and she was from Turkey. She said, you really should have some Middle Eastern food on your menu. You're from Syria. This is crazy. Why don't you send your chef to Turkey to study with me and I'll teach her everything I know? She thought that was a great idea. So after dinner, she basically came up and introduced herself and said, your boss is sending you to Turkey to study with me. And I thought, oh my, Turkey. I imagined genies and flying carpets. I had no idea what to expect. And that particular moment in time changed the course of how I see food and how I cook. And it really transformed me and became a real passion of mine.
Well, what were your experiences? I mean, what'd you do there? What opened up for you? Was this Istanbul, by the way?
No, actually, I flew into a small town called GAZIANTEP, which is about an hour from the Syrian border. It's the capital of gastronomy in Turkey. It's famous for its incredible cuisine, including baklava and their kebab and a lot of their chilies teas and spices and ingredients. It's very close to Syria, which also has very similar style food and is also sort of a culinary mecca for cuisine. And I didn't really know what to expect, but her friends, she had 30 of them, and they cooked a lunch for me. It was like a potluck in a park, and each of these women brought a dish that they had practiced and a dish that they were really proud of, that they felt represented the region and Turkish food. And I tasted 30 dishes, 30 things I'd never really had in my life. And I remember I was so excited I couldn't even sit down. I just had my notebook and I was just writing and writing and tasting and writing and tasting. And I couldn't believe that I'd tasted 30 things for lunch and I felt great. You know, normally when you have a 30 course 30 course lunch, you don't feel so good. And I thought, wow, what is this food? This is incredibly rich, but nothing is heavy. And so that's really where I got sort of hooked. I thought, this is a really interesting way of cooking, and I want to pursue this. I want to study this.
Well, let's back up just a minute. I want to get you to how you ended up cooking anything. Where were you born?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington. My first job, besides babysitting, was in a small neighborhood restaurant called the Santa Fe Cafe. It was New Mexican food. It was owned by a couple of brothers from Albuquerque. And I was washing dishes there when I was 14. And the whole time I was washing dishes, I was watching the kitchen, and they could see me sort of looking back all the time. And they saw that interest of mine and they indulged it. So they offered me a job sort of helping with their Sunday brunch in the kitchen, like making flour tortillas and making salads and things like that. So I started in the kitchen there. I was really interested. So they started sending me to cooking school after school to learn more.
Wow, what kind of boss is that?
I know, right? They saw the interest. They saw the passion.
Were your parents foodies? I hate that term, but I'll use it.
No, I mean, my mother was a stickler for ingredients. She always loved really good ingredients. You know, she would never eat margarine. She'd only eat butter. She would never eat frozen anything. She would always eat fresh. She was never into processed foods, and she grew up with a garden. So she wasn't a fancy cook, but she was a purist.
As a kid, were you up on the step stool next to her helping her out?
Yeah, kind of. I just really love to eat good food. And I realized when I was learning in the kitchen that if I wanted to eat good food, I'd have to learn how to cook. That was really it. And then I didn't really know that it was going to become a career until a little later on. But I was 16 and I really decided that I wanted to go to cooking school.
Hadn't they already sent you to something?
They sent me to like a little school in Seattle, Washington that had like classes that were little demonstrations and things. It was, you know, a really cute little school in the basement of a department store, and it didn't have like a diploma or anything. It wasn't a full-on school. So actually the woman that was running that school, she had gone to the school that I wanted to go to.
When you were 16?
Yeah.
What school was that?
It's called VARENNE. It was a really small hands-on cooking school in Paris.
Hold on, time out. At 16, you decide you want to go to Paris?
I did. I decided very young, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go to cooking school.
How'd the parents feel about that?
They were sort of like, yeah, okay. You know, my mom was always real supportive. My dad was a little more like, can you go to cooking school here? Do you have to go all the way to Paris to do this?
Well, you were still in high school. You hadn't graduated, right?
Right. No, I just sort of knew at a very young age that I loved it so much that I just wanted to keep pursuing it. And so by the time I graduated high school, I'd already taken some French. I had to be fluent in French to get into this school because it was a stagiaire program. It was an exchange for the education. And one of my jobs would be translating. So in order to be accepted as a stagiaire, I had to pass a fluency requirement test. So instead of going to college, I went to a small French school in Seattle full time. So I was working still at this restaurant. I was running their Sunday brunch by this time. I was 18 and trying to pass this test to go to the school. And so finally I passed at 19 and I went off to Paris a couple years after I graduated high school.
What was it about this school in Paris that you just focused in on it? What your instructor in the department store was telling you or what?
Yeah, it was these stories of her learning about food with these chefs and working with vegetables that had just come out of the garden and cooking things like leeks that were just like, wow, what's a leek? You know, all these really cool vegetables and dishes that she was making that she had learned in France. And then these amazing stories of things coming from the garden and things being really fresh. And so I thought, oh, wow, this sounds like the place I want to go. And she became, I've always been someone who's sort of attached to mentors. I've learned and gotten through my life through many mentorships, and she was one of them. She was in the beginning. And so were the people that owned the New Mexican restaurant where I worked for 5 or 6 years. And they really supported my wanting to go to school there. And at some point, I was even renting an apartment from them towards the end for like a really cheap rate so that I could save money to keep towards my goal of going to VARENNE. So I've always been very certain of this. I'm not sure why, other than I didn't have a choice. Some people think that's a blessing, but it's either a blessing or a curse, however you want to look at it.
And we'll be right back. So you show up in Paris. Have you ever been to France before?
I'd been as a young teenager, like a 13-year-old. It was my first time sort of leaving home. Yeah, I was pretty shocked. It wasn't the friendliest place to go. Nor, I had passed this fluency requirement test, right? And I couldn't understand a word in the beginning because they're all speaking slang and I was taught very proper French. So it was like relearning sort of street French, and it was shocking. Seattle was a very friendly place. It was a very small town compared to what it is now, and Paris was a real shock.
The stereotype of the reaction Americans get in Paris is not far off.
Yeah.
So beyond having to kind of relearn the language and dealing with social rejection, tell me about the experience.
It was a little boot camp-ish and intense, almost like having a job and going to school. Well, it was like having a job and going to school. I didn't have the money to be a full student, so that's why I was applying for this apprentice program where I could work in exchange for the education. So I would have a class that I would translate for, and I would also do errands for the chefs where I'd do the shopping in the mornings and I'd do some mise en place, some simple basic preps. I would keep the walk-ins clean and I would help the chefs with their ordering and their lottery tickets and whatever else they needed. We were like their assistants in a way, and assistants for these students. So I would work for the class and the school during the day, and then at night I would have my own practical classes with the chefs would rotate on who would spend time with the stagiaires. And there were incredible teachers, definitely a little bit old school where they weren't screamers or anything, but they also used a lot of bad language, played a lot of tricks. Tricks like, they would put a live eel in my sink when I was washing dishes that would surprise me, or they would...
Oh boy, how fun.
They would lay like a whole wild boar down, obviously not alive, just slaughtered wild boar in the walk-in. So when I opened the door, there was a large animal on the ground, and they would stand back and laugh. They were having fun.
What about sexism and misogyny?
Yeah, definitely. They can't help themselves, I think, sometimes. There was definitely some of that, but I never felt unsafe or disrespected. I mean, sometimes I felt disrespected. That's not true. I would be in the bathroom sometimes crying because they would call me a name or something, or tell me that, my tarte tatin sucked and it's never going to be good enough kind of thing.
And we've all had our tarte tatin demeaned by others. So.
Yeah, it was tough. It was challenging. It was, one of the hardest things I've ever done just because I was very young.
Did going to this school fulfill your hopes that had been fermenting since you were 16?
Yeah, there was no question. It was one of the most challenging but most rewarding experiences of my lifetime for sure. And I could never answer this question until about 10 years ago. But I think what really was different about going to school in France and what I took from that was when ingredients were not good enough, they didn't get used, period. We just would not make that recipe, or we would alter the recipe based on ingredients. And in the United States, especially in the cooking schools here, right? So you have a curriculum, you have this like veal with asparagus and peas. But if there's no asparagus and peas that look good and it's not the season, you don't make that recipe. But here in America, we can get asparagus and peas anytime we want to, right? So we just make the recipe, right? But we don't dial into the nuances of the quality of the ingredients. I would go shopping a lot for the chefs. And if I came back with a strawberry that wasn't perfect, I was in trouble. And so I really dialed in on ingredients there, and I couldn't have had the same experience in the United States. And so that really, to me, was the difference of going to school in France versus the United States. And I'm not saying the United States doesn't have beautiful ingredients. We don't dial into the nuance. We're really into convenience, and we can get anything at any time. And so we've sort of lost our, I like to describe it, it's like having a croissant in the airport and then going to France to the best bakery and having a croissant. Then all of a sudden you're like, that's a croissant. I understand now.
And by extension, how was it as a resident of Paris eating?
Well, I was eating at school all the time. I was definitely on a budget. And then, on special occasions, we would go to really simple bistro and have, chicken and French fries or something. What I also loved was the purity, the simplicity.
When you say simplicity, many Americans think of French food as sauces and complication.
Yeah.
What do you mean by simplicity of French food?
In everyday eating, they're not eating those fancy sauces. They're buying a beautiful roasted chicken at the local, what do you call them? We don't have them really. They're sort of like delis or takeaway places. You might get a celery root remoulade, a celery root salad with mayonnaise and mustard and a roasted chicken. And then they also sell like stuffed tomatoes. So you would go to like these little stores and buy your baguette here and you look for your cheeses at another shop. And I really loved the sort of hunt for really nice ingredients. And so I would eat that way. That's what I mean by simple. But the actual cooking techniques that we learned in school, that was a different story. And yes, we were eating a lot of like velouté, mornay, hollandaise, all those things. So that was fancier at school. But the everyday Parisian eats pretty simply, and they're eating just high quality bread, cheese, vegetables, meats.
I was lucky enough to work in France many times. Thinking about it, I'm salivating here. So thank you. How long were you over there studying?
I was there for about 1.5 years. So not long, not a 4-year degree at all. There was no, it's not like Johnson & Wales or the CIA. There was no other curriculum besides practical cooking. So we never had classes on like hospitality or wine or anything like that.
P&L sheets and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, it was strictly just cooking and baking.
You returned to the States.
Yeah.
Now what?
I went back to Seattle and I worked for a guy named Tom Douglas, a big name in Seattle, especially back then. He had a place called Cafe Sport. I worked there for 1 year. I started as a baker. I thought I wanted to go into pastry. And I did the same thing I did when I started cooking at the little New Mexican restaurant. I was in the bakery watching all the line cooks have all this fun, all this action, right? So I was like, I don't want to bake. I want to be on the line. That's when I basically just started working as a line cook.
But what kind of food was it?
This was very like Seattle fusion, lots of Asian, lots of European. It was just sort of maybe a little California, Pacific Northwest, a lot of local ingredients and sort of classic crab cakes and, a Caesar salad and Asian noodles and like spicy peanut noodles, things that were really iconic international dishes, and with a lot of fish, a lot of crab and a lot of salmon and things like that. So the food wasn't that sophisticated in Seattle. The restaurant scene was okay. People were spending their disposable income on hiking, skiing, camping, and not really on restaurants. So I wanted to go to a city that wasn't as big as Paris. So I didn't want to go to New York, but a little bit bigger than Seattle and with a culture that was used to spending their money in restaurants, dining. Someone offered me a job in Boston. Somebody I'd worked with at the Santa Fe Cafe, the little New Mexican restaurant. She had moved to Boston and was running a catering company, so she needed a sous chef. I had never been to Boston, but I figured, that sounds like it's kind of what I'm looking for. So I got on a plane and I basically never turned back. I loved it instantly.
Back in a moment. Take me through your professional progression in Boston.
I started at this catering company as a sous chef. I catered for maybe 3 years. And while I was doing that, I did a stint in the south of France for a few months trying to work on yachts.
When you say trying to work on yachts, it didn't work out?
Yeah, that was a little sketchy. There were some captains that wanted special favors as well as me to cook, things like that. It was not my thing. I met someone who introduced me to a Tunisian chef who was going to open a restaurant in the suburbs of Boston called Igo Bistro. And I really connected with this chef, and he was going to open a Mediterranean restaurant. So I knew a lot from my little south of France stint, and also from being in France. I worked for him and opened this little place called Igo Bistro. For 3 years, I worked as chef de cuisine. I was running the kitchen, and he was helping me develop the menus and kind of coaching me through my first chef job. So he was more like the executive chef. I was the CDC. So I did that for 3 years, and they opened another restaurant in Harvard Square, which I then left Igo Bistro to go open that restaurant. And that restaurant was called 8 Holyoke. And then during the time I was at 8 Holyoke, I did a stage in Spain for 3 weeks in Barcelona. So I learned a little Spanish stuff, kind of another exposure of Mediterranean food. I left 8 Holyoke to move across the way to a restaurant called Casablanca in Harvard Square, which is where I stayed then for 5 years before I opened my own restaurant.
This is the one owned by the Syrian chef?
Yeah.
And it was while you were here that you went to Turkey.
Exactly.
When do you get the itch to open your own place, and why?
It was funny because when I left 8 Holyoke, I was so young. I was like in my 20s. I'm thinking that I'm going to open my own restaurant pretty soon. I was just like, I was driven. I knew that I would do this someday. So I said to the owner of Casablanca before I started working with him, his name was Sarri. I said, Sarri, I'll help you. Casablanca was like a packed bar, and he wanted to put some really good food. So he wanted to be known for food and the bar. So I was like, okay, well, I'll help you with the menu. We'll get the food rolling, but I want to open my own restaurant. So the deal is, if I do this for a few years, can you help me with resources on sort of how to open my own restaurant? Will you teach me? So that was our sort of agreement. And he was unbelievable. And I worked with him for 5 years until we found a place in Cambridge, and that is Oleana. And I met my business partner there. He was a bartender. His name's Gary Griffin. And we found the space at Oleana really compelling because of the outdoor patio that it had. And it wasn't available at that time, so we were looking in Portland, Maine. And then right when we were about to sign an agreement in Portland, Maine, we got a call from the location where Oleana is. And that's sort of the beginning of Oleana. So I had just been to Turkey, and Gary and I, my business partner and I, had just came from a trip across the Mediterranean. We traveled from the north of Italy down into Portugal on a road trip, sort of trying to visualize a concept for Oleana. And the Turkey thing just kept calling my name. I was like, this is so much more interesting. I loved the food of the south of France and of Spain and of Portugal on that trip and of northern Italy, but my heart was in what I learned in Turkey.
So what was the mission statement? What was the ethos? What is it today?
We wanted two things. For food, I really wanted to expand people's perception of what Mediterranean food was. At that point, there were lots of Mediterranean restaurants, but they were all Italian, Greek, Spanish, Provençal. Nothing was East. So I wanted to expand people's perception of what Mediterranean food was by bringing it further east. I wanted to bring Middle Eastern flavors into the mainstream. I really wanted to highlight Turkish food and my passion for it. And we really wanted to shoot for the middle. We didn't want a high-end restaurant where it was only people that had money that were coming, and we didn't want to be sort of a hole-in-the-wall kind of place. So for some people, Oleana is a special occasion. For other people, it's not. It's an everyday place.
Let me deal with the name first of all, and then I want to talk about the food. Oleana is actually your name, right? Ana is a diminutive.
Exactly. Yeah. Oleana is an old-fashioned Norwegian name, and it's also a story about a paradise, a utopia that fails, of course, where you don't have to water the plants. Food is just everywhere and it grows in abundance. It's a place of abundance.
So we'll ignore the failing part. You seem to have handled the rest. Let's talk about the food. You talked about focusing on ingredients in France. I assume ingredients are central to what you're doing here.
Yeah. So what I loved about Eastern Mediterranean food and the stuff that I learned in Turkey was that it was very heavy on vegetables. The style of eating was also a very important thing to express somehow. And, you know, you would sit down to dinner to many small plates, and Sometimes it was 5, sometimes it was 25. And these small plates called meze, a lot of them are very vegetable focused. They might be something as simple as like melon and feta, or a fava bean pate, or a salad of red pepper and walnuts. There's so many different meze, but you could eat the whole meal this way, or you could have a few meze and then have either meat or fish. And what ends up happening is you get satiety from all these different tastes of vegetables. So you fill up on these vegetables and then you have your meat or fish. So you end up really needing less meat or fish. And I think that's some of the reason why the food feels so good after you eat it, is that, you know, and they're using these spices and these ingredients like tahini and pomegranate molasses and nuts and cheeses to make things really richer, but it's not butter, it's not cream, so you don't fill up fast. It's not heavy at all. This style of eating was a big part of it.
A few years after opening, you won the James Beard Award for Best Chef in the Northeast. Along with the critical reception, were you filling the place? I mean, were you a big success early?
No. Can you imagine? We opened a Middle Eastern restaurant in 2001. It was a little bit bad timing, right? So September 11th changed a lot. We sort of dumbed it down a little bit.
What do you mean by that?
You know, the word Arabic wasn't a great word, you know, so we took a lot of the sort of Arab language out of the menu. It didn't last long. Like, people, they were smarter than that. It was food. It wasn't politics.
So you got back on your original track?
We did. And we did have to educate. We had to do things like put a glossary on the menu. We had to really teach our staff about these spices and flavors. It was really much more challenging to work at Oleana than other places because these, you know, the vocabulary was different. You had to study, you had to learn. And it wasn't easy finding cooks either. It wasn't like someone had come to us with 3 years experience from another Turkish restaurant in Boston. You know, we had to teach. It's like everybody played classical piano and we had to teach everybody jazz. It was different and more challenging, but it caught on and it did actually become more mainstream. And at first I was so nervous. Every time there would be Turkish people that would come to the restaurant, I would be like, oh my God, they're going to hate it. Oh my God, they're going to tell me that this isn't how their mother made, you know, moussaka, or isn't how their mother made dolma or whatever. And I was super nervous, but every single time they were practically in tears that someone was taking their cuisine seriously and really being inspired by it.
Well, someone was honoring their cuisine.
Absolutely.
Which in the first place was hard to find in the States.
Exactly.
Let's go through the menu a little bit. You talk about meze. You got whipped feta with homemade crackers. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's actually, it's a Turkish and a Greek dish where you're taking feta, blending in roasted peppers, but also the 3 most important ingredients are a fermented red pepper paste called salça in Turkey. It's got a lot of umami in it, and a combination of 2 different dried chilies, an urfa and a Maraş chili, which are both very unique. One more known more for its heat, one more known for its sort of dark, chocolatey, bittersweet taste. The feta is whipped. It has to be a good creamy sheep's milk feta, which is, you know, in Greeks, they would faint if you said something like that. Feta is always cow's milk, and this is a French version that gets real creamy. We make some seedy crackers to go with it. They don't necessarily belong to either Turkey or Greece. They're sort of an adaptation of something here. We use a local fresh wheat for those crackers. It's a very popular sort of first couple of bites.
Here's another first couple of bites. You do a kind of hummus that is not the one most Americans are familiar with. Tell me about that.
One of my favorite things, I've not gotten tired of that, and it's been on the menu for over 20 years. It's something that we had in Cappadocia, which is in the center of Turkey. So hummus essentially means chickpeas in Arabic. It isn't always with tahini.
Well, it is in like Lebanon or Israel.
Not necessarily. You could have a whole chickpea hummus on bread with lemon, garlic, and olive oil and no tahini, and that would still be a hummus. There's just many versions of hummus, even in Lebanon and Syria. Some have tahini and some don't.
Well, this doesn't, right?
Correct. This is like chickpeas pureed with garlic and lemon and cumin, but no tahini. And then we stuff it with a little bit of butter, like a little cube of butter. So it's less of a soft hummus. It's more firm. And then we wrap it with a a piece of dry cured beef called basturma. It has lots of spices on the outside. It's like the Italian bresaola, but it's cured with fenugreek and chilies.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and then we warm it so that the butter inside of it melts. And so when you sort of cut into it, there's a little bit of warm butter that comes out of it. It's made with half butter and half olive oil instead of just all olive oil and tahini. We do dry cured black olives and tomato with it as well. It's a really delicious bite.
That sounds extraordinary. So far, I got to be there tomorrow. Let's move farther down the menu. Quail kebab under a brick?
Yeah, so my business partner, Cassie from SARMA, she and I worked together for many years.
SARMA is another one of your restaurants. We're going to get there in a minute.
She and I went to Australia for the Australian Food and Wine Festival. She was the chef de cuisine at Oleana at the time, and she and I did a cooking demonstration in Australia, and we went out to dinner, and we went to a Lebanese restaurant, and they had a quail kebab with barberries and pistachios, and we were just over the moon. And we had this really amazing source for Vermont quail in Boston that was urging me to go back and kind of recreate this. But one of the things I really did not like about quail was all the tiny little bones. It wasn't just my own personal choice, but it was unfriendly to customers. It's too much like eating a tiny bird. It was too hard for people to sort of wrap their head around and also just to manage while they're eating. So we ended up deboning the quail.
Gee, that's a ton of work.
It's not necessarily something that you'd want to do at home.
I don't want to be the new cook on your staff when that job gets handed out.
I know it's not a very popular job. However, we have become very, very good at it. So we get these amazing quail from Vermont, from Cavendish. They've been doing it for a long, long time, a family business. We take the quail half deboned but intact, and we fold the leg into the breast, and we season it with a couple different spice blends. One is this mixture called bahara, which has cumin and dried mint and oregano and cinnamon. It's a mixture of warm, sweet, earthy spices, and then a little bit of green chili heat. And then we press it under a brick. So they come in these like little medallions of boneless quail, and they get kind of crispy. And then we coat them in ground pistachio and these little tiny barberries, which are very tart, like a lemon or cranberry might be. And it's just enough bright acidity. And then it's served on a crispy rice cake, which the rice cake is really meant to mimic the Persian rice and the crust you get called tadig on it. A complicated dish, but that's sort of the inspiration behind it, was having a boned-in quail kebab at a Lebanese restaurant in Australia.
I'm looking at the dessert section of the menu, and you have a number of things, including a hazelnut chocolate baklava that are obviously from or influenced by the Mediterranean, the Middle East. But you are sort of famous for your baked Alaska. Where did that come from?
Yeah, when we first opened Oleana, I really, really, really wanted to highlight ice creams. Nobody in town was sort of honoring ice cream, like having it be sort of a focus of dessert. So it is so random. It is not Turkish. It is not even Mediterranean. It's one of these sort of iconic desserts that was like flambéed tableside. But my business partner at SOFRA now, Maura, is our pastry chef for, basically she has helped and inspired the desserts for every place. And she created this baked Alaska that became so popular, there was absolutely no way we could take it off the menu.
It's ice cream inside something that's baked, right?
Yes, we do a coconut ice cream made with infusing cream with unsweetened coconut.
You're making your own ice cream. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then we wrap it in a meringue, an Italian meringue, and it's sitting on a coconut cake. It goes in the oven. The meringue sort of insulates the ice cream, keeps it from melting. And the meringue starts to cook a little bit in the oven, and then we torch it to get it like a crisp, a sort of a marshmallow on the outside. And then we serve it with a passion fruit caramel. So it's this sort of like charred meringue with a really nutty, savory ice cream and a very sweet, tart passion fruit caramel.
I will be there by 5 p.m. today.
I wish we could just send you one.
I wish you could. Okay, you opened additional places. You've mentioned SOFRA. You opened that in 2008. What is SOFRA?
SOFRA is a small bakery and cafe. We have a lot of meze there and these really thin stuffed flatbreads called guzleme. We have shawarma, things like that. And then we have an incredible selection of cookies and baklavas and pastries like almond rose cake and kunafe.
What's kunafe?
It's a shredded phyllo sandwiched with a sweet cheese inside and soaked in a little bit of syrup. It's in the baklava family, but it's a cheese filled. Maura, my business partner at SOFRA, she's the pastry chef. When we opened Oleana, I said, please come help me with the desserts at Oleana, and someday we'll do the bakery of your dreams. And so 7 years after we opened Oleana, we opened SOFRA with Maura. All the baked goods in there is really her vision of her bakery. So we sort of tag teamed on it. She does the sweet part, I do the savory part. It's been open for about 17 years now.
And you've got a third place called SARMA in Somerville.
Somerville, which is right next to Cambridge. It's like another neighborhood in Boston. So that's also a similar story. Cassie is a woman that I worked with for so long at Oleana, about 15 years together. And SARMA is really her baby. She's gone off and she's the incredible genius behind all the small plates that are there. It's modeled after meyhane, which is like a drinking style of restaurant, like a tapas bar kind of thing, but Turkish style. And there's tons of small plates, lots of great cocktails, and it's in a very lively neighborhood.
And for all of the places, you're getting produce from your husband?
Yeah, so we try to use as much of our own veg as we can. But yes, I fell in love with a vegetable farmer, and Sienna Farms is a huge part of my work and my personal life. And I've learned probably some of my biggest lessons ever from that farm. It's been quite an experience being married to a farmer and watching all the work that goes into growing food.
People don't realize everything it takes to bring anything to the table, do they?
They really don't. Even something as simple as really good carrots.
Yeah, but most of us don't get really good carrots. We get carrots in a plastic bag, right?
Yeah. Once you have that first farmer's market experience, it's hard to go back.
It costs more to eat good stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it can as a consumer, unless you're growing it or making it yourself.
So how are we going to get America to, quote, eat better, unquote?
This is the $1 million question, isn't it? Well, I think we're on our way.
You think so, really?
Yeah, I mean, my husband has a great project he does for food insecurity. There's a really cool mobile truck now that goes around where people can use SNAP and any kind of sort of food support from the government and buy Sienna Farms vegetables. It is accessible. It's sort of spreading the word and getting into the communities and teaching them and showing them and giving them the access. But trust me, there isn't a person who can't taste the difference.
Along those same lines, we are a country of ultra-processed foods, fast foods, chain restaurants. Do you see that changing at all? I mean, I don't.
No, I don't either. I wish I could say so. It's like everything else. It does have a place, perhaps. And it's sort of like how you choose to use it is, I think, the dilemma, just like our phones and everything else in the world. You know, it's just like that bag of Oreos. It's maybe not an everyday thing, but maybe it belongs occasionally in our lives. I don't know.
The restaurant industry has always been difficult. Margins are low, bankruptcies are high. As the economy gets tougher for many people, it gets tougher for many restaurants. What do you see going forward?
Unfortunately, I think restaurants are going to have to be more expensive to pay better wages and survive with all the costs, the rising costs and the rents and things like that. I mean, I think it's pretty common sense, though. We really look for low rent locations in order to survive. It isn't a mainstream strategy because there just aren't that many places that you can find affordable rent. But if your rent is really high, which it is often, that's really the name of the game. That's the survival game. It really starts from just everything from the rent and how much you choose to spend on your toilets and your chairs and tables and glassware to the ingredients that you're using, and everything's just costing more. And unfortunately, I really do think that service is where it's going to end up giving at some point.
More fast casual, less real sit-down dining?
Yeah, perhaps even those robots.
Oh.
I don't know if I want to see that. Hospitality is such a big piece of what we do, but it costs money. There are people that need to make livings and such. So yeah, there's many challenges, but there's one thing that you just can't, like, I don't believe restaurants will ever go away or change drastically. We might go in and out of some phases just to survive certain economic crisis or whatever we're going through, but it's been there for so long. It's a place where people gather, restore. It's a important community place. It has its job. It will never, ever go away. People will spend money doing that and save money somewhere else because the social connection is too important.
going forward for you and your restaurants? Maybe a fourth place?
No, I think I'm all set. I've gone to Turkey once or twice a year for the last 30 years. It is such a huge part of how I choose to work every day. It's influenced me in so many ways, and I really want to write about it. The last cookbook we did one for SOFRA. It's called SOFRA Meze.
You've got 2 cookbooks, right?
Yeah, we have Spice that is now officially, it's 20 years old. It's out of print. And so it's making me want to write another one. I have the need to continue my purpose, which is to really honor and highlight Turkish food and continue the process of teaching that cuisine to Americans. So that's really a big thing. I want to continue seeing the chefs that I work with grow and thrive, and that's also a really big thing.
You've done a remarkable job. That's obvious.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for taking the time to chat with me. It's been lovely meeting you and talking about cuisine that, frankly, not everybody is all that familiar with.
Well, I really appreciate it. I wish I could sit and ask you a million questions, too. You have so much experience talking to so many people around the country. I appreciate you talking to me.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you so much. And listen, next time I'm in Boston, I'm coming in.
Yeah, don't be a stranger. Please pop by. We'll have a baked Alaska ready for you, for sure. It will never come off the menu, so you don't have to worry about missing anything.
Okay, but we're starting with the butter hummus.
Yeah.
Ana Sortun on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time.